Hello. Yes, sir. Good. Sarbojit, sir. Good morning.
Yes, sir. Good morning. Sir, am I audible? Sir, am I audible?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I'm sorry for being late. There were certain issues with my cell phone. Yeah. Hello.
Yes,
Sir.
sir.
Yeah. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Yeah. So, friends, I welcome you all to this fourth day of the refresher course program being organized by RTM Nagpur University, Nagpur. And in the first session of the day, in the first session of the day that we have on post-colonialism and culture industry, we have Professor Sarbojit Vishwas with us. Sir is Professor of English at the School of Literature, Language and Culture Studies at Bankura University, West Bengal. Sir has been visiting research fellow at the University of New South Wales, Sydney, and an awardee of many awards in collaboration with the foreign universities. Uh, he has been a project director of ICSSR research project titled Discoursing the Homeless Elderly, Tropes, Desires and Containment. Sir has also worked as an international research project fellow in number of international research projects on the areas like waterways and climate change. Sir's MPhil and doctoral thesis were on indigenous Australian writer Kim Scott. Dr. Bishwas is currently engaged in research on gerontology studies, memory studies, Australian studies, Scottish studies, environmental studies, and American studies. So on behalf of the participants and Nagpur University, I welcome sir to this session and hand over the mic to him for his presentation. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Namaste. Good morning.
Namaste, sir.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I am very happy today. I'm very glad today to be here and honored to be speaking to you all, to be invited for this refresher course of Nagpur University. I have been to Nagpur previously and I am familiar, but then obviously because of the pandemic and everything, ultimately this is how we get to meet, which is very unfortunate because I remember when I first did my orientation program, it was in JNU in 2005, almost 17 years back. It was a physical experience. Sir, I believe I'm audible.
Yeah.
Yes,
You're audible, sir.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so it was a wonderful experience of 28 days in JNU. I went back for a refresher also to JNU and Jadavpur University in Kolkata. Those were wonderful days, I believe. And today, unfortunately, this is how we have to meet. And it's just a meeting of, as I see, we have just 1.5 hours and we discuss something. And then means because you understand that being part of a physical refresher course or a orientation program is a totally different ball game. But we cannot do anything. That is how it goes on right now, I believe, and that is what is will happen in the future, I believe. So coming to what I have been assigned today, I would be speaking on the topic which I have been assigned: post-colonialism and the culture industry. So, with your permission, sir, I would like to share my screen if I can. I believe this is visible. Could someone tell me if this is visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you so much. Yes, so as I said, I would be speaking about post-colonialism and the culture industry. We do not need to, I believe, discuss what is per se post-colonialism without any hyphen. But I'll just start with a couple of slides with some pictures. I believe you're aware of who these writers are, who these personalities are. And I think we all are aware of the very strong role or the leading role which literary agents or publishing houses with their promotional campaigns have done in the last 30 years or have been doing in the last 30, 40 years. And the role played by international literary prizes, the lot of media coverage or the internet coverages and everything. Almost every author has an internet page. Okay, and from that what we arrive at is obviously there have been a lot of successful marketing stories. On the screen, you can see a lot of writers who have won Nobel Prizes or who have won Booker Prizes or other prizes, Pulitzer Prizes, and these post-colonial writers, they have been getting this in unprecedented numbers. They are visible, as I want to say, and they have now become a very important part of the canon, and they are being awarded for that. So this is the first thing. And today we have a new generation of post-colonial sort of literary jet setters who are widely spoken about, who are widely looked after, and who get a lot of prizes here and there. The second thing, the second slide which we want to look at is this story of a book fair. We all know, and I believe I'm repeating something which you all know and you are aware of. Salman Rushdie, Booker Prize, Midnight's Children. And with that, most probably, post-colonial literature became this much sought after commodity. He was a flamboyant personality. He was a sort of cross-cultural elite. He had that wonderful upbringing. And before the fatwa which was issued to him, he was a wonderful master, or you can say he wonderfully played the game of this cultural industry. On the right-hand side of the screen, you can see Arundhati Roy's The God of Small Things. It also won the Booker Prize in 1997. It was a wonderfully primed commercial work with a commercial network which worked around the globe. This commercial network was activated. There was a multi-dollar advance. There was a campaign for the book. It coincided with the 50th anniversary of India's independence. There was a full-blown media coverage. There was a lot of things. She traveled all over the world to promote the book. This exotic thing was highlighted. So, and ultimately, it led to the Booker. So, if we look at the transition in these 17 or 18 years between these two moments, which are there, means if I say call these are book fairs. So first this Midnight's Children, and later on God of Small Things. What we see is that there are lots of changes here, maybe, and over time, Rushdie has emerged as a wonderful writer, a fantastic writer. He is raved by literary critics, but at the same time, when Arundhati Roy's work came out, she was slammed as a superficial writer who had got a lot of fame maybe by playing this post-colonial card properly. And it was such that her work was translated in so many languages. There were lots of sales, means the sales skyrocketed, but there was oversaturation or supersaturation that exhausted the critics. And even though there was a lot of commercial value, maybe the critical value was not there. So in case of the first novel, Midnight's Children, there was marketing, but that was it was ultimately, it was supposed to be a celebration of a very worthy author. But in the second case, even though the marketing was very unprecedented, unfortunately it superimposed on how the author, how Arundhati Roy was evaluated, and maybe that was in detriment to her literary worth. In the last 30, 40, 50 years, we have also seen a lot of films about identity, which cross national divides, which cross historical time zones, which are post-colonial. They bridge these spaces of time and place, and they sort of bring forward the post-colonial critique. They critique the entire thing. On the left-hand side, you can find the famous work Cache by Michael Haneke. He is actually Austrian, lived in France when he did this work, which was about Algeria, French national identity with respect to Algeria and the colonial past, the haunting colonial past in Algeria. On the right-hand side, you can see the film which won the Oscars, Danny Boyle's Slumdog Millionaire, which was sort of a portrayal of the slums of Mumbai, of the life of an orphan, related to Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, Kaun Banega Crorepati, as we see today. And what we found once again here was this packaging, this industry, how this was presented. If you look at the title, the feel-good film of the decade, okay, that was how it was highlighted. So what is this entire thing about? So if I may now come to the main area which we were talking of, and I would not be speaking about post-colonialism, obviously. But if we look at the culture industry, we know that this is just refreshing of memory. We know that this was first used by Adorno and Horkheimer in their Dialectic der Aufklärung, that is Dialectic of Enlightenment, in 1947. In fact, there was a chapter there which was titled The Culture Industry, Enlightenment as Mass Deception. And when Adorno wrote about this, it was obviously to find a sort of relationship between art and its production. There was a belief that artworks, they were not independent, but they were actually being controlled by a sort of capitalist system. Means capitalism was there. So who was Theodor Adorno? He was a philosopher, musician, one of prominent Marxist theoreticians on art. He was a member of the Frankfurt School of Marxism. They had their Center Institute for Social Research, which was in Frankfurt, established in 1923. They had their journal, the English title of which is Journal of Philosophy and Social Science, which was there during 1930s and 1940s. And the main focus was, their concern was the cultural forms of media and how they work. That is, in those days, there was radio, there was music, there were motion pictures, there was nothing else. TV and internet was not there at that time. So they were interested in that. I'm quoting from Adorno, and if you may please read with me. He says that, actually this is quoted from a separate work which appeared later. And he says that when this culture industry thing was first used in the book, which Horkheimer and I published in Amsterdam in 1947, this was the first time it was used. In our general outlines, we talked about mass culture. We have discarded this latter expression and replaced it with culture industry. So first thing was rejection of mass culture, and the new term which they used was culture industry. Why? Our goal being to exclude from the outset the interpretation which the advocates of mass culture like so much, that is rejection of that. Why? Because these people claim in effect that what is involved is a culture that arises or that grows spontaneously from the masses themselves. So mass culture, according to them, was something which came out from the masses. And so it was mass culture. Masses means the common people. For example, present day form of folk art, as he writes. But then Adorno says, well, the culture industry differs from this art in its most basic principle. So the basic principle there was mass culture comes from the masses. What is the basic principle? In all of its fields, the products that are considered for mass consumption and that determine that consumption to a great extent are manufactured, please note, more or less according to plan. So when it is mass culture and when it is created by the masses, it has no plan. It is not manufactured. It is born spontaneously. But he says no. In culture industry, in the modern culture industry, it is determined. When there is a consumer, then only production is done, and that is according to a plan. And it's a sort of not spontaneous creation, but a sort of manufacturing. He goes on to add in a separate place. So what does this cultural industry or the culture industry take into account? Number one, the state of consciousness and unconsciousness of the millions of people, that is the masses, that it is directed to. So who are the consumers? These people. There are two parts: consciousness, that is the people who are conscious are aware of what they are consuming, and also the unconscious people, that is, who are not aware of what they are being fed. But the masses are not the principal factor here. Actually, they are a secondary element, and that is calculated in an accessory to the machinery. So the masses are not, according to Adorno, the main part. They are just an accessory.
बोलिए सर्टिफिकेट दे देना। अरे हाँ, मैं सॉफ्ट कॉपी है आज मेरे पास, भेजो। किस चीज के लिए? बच्चों के पार्टिसिपेशन के भी सर्टिफिकेट अगर है।
I believe somebody's microphone is switched on.
Please mute your mics.
Thank you so much. Okay, so as we were saying, so these mass
Please unmute your mic. Sorry.
Okay, right. My mic also got muted. Sorry. Yes. I think now I'm audible. Yeah. So as I was saying, the consumer, yes. So the masses, they are now part of the machinery. They are part of the production. And so the term mass media that has been imposed upon the culture industry does nothing but minimize the phenomenon. That is, nothing else happens. The real issue is not merely the masses nor the techniques of communication as such, but please note, rather the spirit which is breathed into them through their master's voice. So please note their master's voice. And as we understand, he is speaking about capitalism. That is, the consumer is force-fed whatever the manufacturer would want to sort of give to that consumer, give to the masses. All right. Yeah. So if we like to look at, or if we want to look at all these things through the filter of the cultural industry, what happened here was this sort of filter, this difference between high art, low art, for example, totally destroyed, because everything was similar, because it was just a manufacturing thing, means the oppositional critical aspects of art destroyed. What did it do? It took books, paintings, other things, music, and they were converted into films, that is adaptations of books, or even posters or records. This, they felt, was for the entertainment of the audience. And they believed that if the audience is fed with all this, they would stop thinking about their everyday problems. And according to, I don't know, who was ultimately in exile in the US, both of them were in the US, they believed that it was a sort of integration. Just as in Europe, in Western societies, there is an integration mechanism. Just as there is fascism, there was Nazism in Europe. He believes in this also, in this cultural industry, the same integration of society is being done. It's just the cultural industry is just an alternative model for a similar integration of society, which was practiced in Europe during the Nazi rule in Germany. So he equates that while he was living in exile, obviously. Interestingly, so they believe that what the cultural industry is very barbaric in a cultural and moral sense. Why? Because it prevents thought. So just as fascism or Nazism, they prevented thought. Here also the cultural industry, it prevents thought, because man is consigned to wallow in immaturity and thus denied the chance of enlightenment. So there is no scope for enlightenment. There is no scope for anything. And because of that, he says that there is a sort of integration which is similar to what the Nazis did. And so what was the effect? So we understand that this is a very bleak view of the culture industry which they had. And obviously it was because of the time, as I said, they had in exile in the US. And this was during the war, after the war, and they saw society which was in transformation. And they saw that art, which is a very critical tool of society, of this society, it was slowly being converted into a commodity. And that is what their work in the 1930s, it presents, it reflects their experiences. And they are European, they are German, but they have gone to California, they are living in California, they saw from very close quarters the Jewish Hollywood magnates making films, having great colossal cinematic projects. So what do they find? That there was a sort of disorientation in Europe, sort of devastation, a turmoil. So they believe that European culture has a high standard. It is a very high standard. It's a model of cultural analysis. It is very uncompromising. It is very rigorous. But then at the same time, it is integrating. And if I may quote, but they did not make any effort to attain any benefit that was not immediate in terms of their own reality. What is new in the culture industry is the immediate and admitted primacy of the effect. So more important now is the effect. Very well studied in its most typical products, because the people are the consumers. The autonomy, please note, of works of art, which of course has hardly ever existed in pure form, and which was always been guided by the search for the effect, finally became wiped out by the culture industry. So with the culture industry, this autonomy of art, which was previously existent in a different way, totally lost. Because as I said previously, these oppositional things have been destroyed. There was no, in a way, differentiation between high art and low art. And so, according to them, what is the effect? If I may continue with Adorno and Horkheimer. First thing, people, the consumers, they have mass-produced products. Interestingly, and because obviously this is a Marxist angle, those products which are manufactured or created for them as consumers are actually given to them based on their social positions, based on their financial ability to purchase, based on their purchasing power. They, on their own, as consumers, they cannot choose anything. Who chooses it for them? The cultural industry. The culture industry identifies which product is appropriate for which person, who should be the consumer of a certain product, and passes it on. And obviously, because of that, there is a price tag. Every commodity has a price tag. And what happens if it is distributed that way, when the consumer has no choice? When the consumer is force-fed like this, ultimately the consumer loses his or her critical insight. That is, they lose their judgmental power. They are not able to judge anymore. They are not able to critically analyze whatever they have. And so, what does it do? It does not ultimately satisfy what the consumer wants. It just produces something for the consumer, but not important if the consumer is satisfied or not, because there is no choice. The consumer is force-fed. And so this is the working of the cultural industry within the capitalist economy. Sir, I believe there are 3 people waiting to join. Can we admit? Okay. So, because of all this, if I may quote from a very recent work, some 22 or 24 years back, they write, what happened then? The cultural industry inevitably brought about the bankruptcy of culture. And as Adorno had said, or has said, it was reduced to a mere commodity and nothing else. The consumer had no role at all. He was just a consumer. He had no he lost his critical insight, he lost everything. And just mere commodification of these objects. So if I quote from a work which was published later on, Adorno and Horkheimer, they say, please note, if a movement from a Beethoven symphony is crudely adapted for a film soundtrack. So you have a film, you want a soundtrack, you want a background music, or you want a song, you crudely adapt what? A Beethoven symphony. Just as in the same way, a Tolstoy novel is garbled into a film in a film script. That is, a novel is converted into a film. Anna Karenina, I remember. Though that was a good one. that the claim that this is done to satisfy the spontaneous wishes of the public is no more than hot air. That is, after doing this conversion, Beethoven into a film track, Tolstoy novel into a film, they say, the culture industry says that this has been done to satisfy the public because it is a commodity, there is a consumer out there who wants it. But according to Adorno, that is not done. That is actually not acceptable. So we looked at what Adorno and Horkheimer spoke about in the early 1930s, 40s, and what was happening in the cultural industry or the culture industry at that time, and how they sort of moved away from the concept of mass media and everything mass production to something else. But that was at that time, almost 80, 90 years back, 70 years back. If you look at the critical reception of what they said, first of all, because this was, a lot of critics say that this was dated and this was related to the war. And it is very fashionable nowadays to dismiss their work. Because one reason was they believe that in those days, media did not consist of TV and internet, which is such a big thing today. They had no idea about that. And so their thoughts were not related to the either television medium or the internet medium and social media and all the stuff we have today. Also, some considered them to be orthodox, elitist. And also the fact that they also say that there is no difference between the various forms of media. They only speak about media. Means maybe they do not segregate according to maybe films, LP records, magazines, radio, and stuff like that. And so in the 1960s, 70s, there was a sort of rejection of this term, cultural industry, because they considered cultural industry to be a singular term. And there was a propensity, they opted for cultural industries, where each of them, these were separate singular identities. So there was a movement to the plural, cultural industries, because there was a need for differentiation between the various products, which we spoke about previously. There was television, there is newspapers, radios, music records, and other stuff. So that has to be different. These, because they ultimately segregated to different industries, and the specialties, they changed, they diverged. So there was publishing, there was music, there was film, there was gaming industry. We remember when we were younger, we had Nintendo, and Nintendo is still there. We had the video game system, which started at that time. There is fashion also. There is opera. There is the role of museums and galleries, art galleries, museums. Also the role of architecture, buildings. So these were separate. So there was a need for a sort of separation of them. And so there was a sort of pluralization, that is, cultural industries was coined. So one could consider or do empirical studies differently. Okay, there were separate areas, and that would also help if you go to business schools, MBA schools, the field of cultural management, which they have. Even in industries, we have culture studies or cultural studies. So that pluralization happened to an extent at that time. One famous critic is Andreas Thyssen, and he is very critical of Adorno. First of all, obviously, he says while he is Marxist, he is not Marxist enough, means the Marxism is not totally there. Secondly, he also rejects this idea, which we spoke about previously, that cultural products are totally controlled by corporates, by the capitalist industry, means by the manufacturers. They manufacture it and give it to us who are the consumers. So he rejects that. And he says, I quote, the double danger of Adorno's theory is that the specificity of cultural products is wiped out. That is the problem. Total erasure. And the consumer, remember we spoke about the consumer who has nothing, who has no critical insight, nothing. The consumer is imagined in a state of passive regression. The consumer is doing nothing. Passive regression. So if cultural products were commodities through and through and had only exchange value, because when you speak of commodity, you go and buy some milk, you go and buy some bread. So if they were just something which commodities had only exchange value, they would no longer be able to fulfill their function in the processes of ideological reproduction, because there is something else also. Ideology is there. So according to him, sort of means Hussein, he upholds this idea that these cultural products, they ultimately sustain the use of value for capital. And so they are also apt to act as a point of struggle, as a point of subversion. He also writes, and he also believes that this cultural industry, it has a very crucial role in looking after the cultural needs of people, in looking after and satisfying and legitimizing the cultural needs of the consumers. And so maybe it has some public function, it has some public role because of that. And the place or the point or the avenue where the cultural industry, it sort of attempts to homogenize these social contradictions, or it wants to maybe articulate or speak about those things which move away from ideology. Those are the areas where there are contestations, where there is contest, there is struggle, means they conflict. And what is the suggestion, as was represented in as was written in the last line, processes of ideological reproduction? We would have to remember that ideology is never or can never be economic in nature. Ideology is not economic at all. So that is Andreas Husserl. In 1998, 24 years back, this book will, there is someone who wants to get it. In 1998, this book, The Culture Industry, this was published by Heinz Stennert. And he also sort of provided wonderful criticism about what Adorno and Horkheimer speak. He delineated three things. We will look at that. The first thing, when we look at the interpretation, the first thing is the elitist thing. So, as we discussed previously, and as Steinert writes, Adorno and Horkheimer, they sort of create a dichotomy between the high and the low, the serious art and the low art, or serious art and popular culture, if you say. But at the same time, they sort of also offer a critique of intellectuals and the sort of self-immersion which is there of these intellectuals in the cultural industry. That is also sort of, there is a critique of that. Also, Adorno and Horkheimer, they do not consider or they do not look down at the audiences which they were speaking about as either stupid or who can be easily duped. Means it is not that they considered them to be these, means people who do not have any brains. But they do the opposite. They sort of criticize something, a cultural production, which does not provide these consumers or these people with challenges, which is otherwise their due. We spoke about the fact that they do not have the scope for critical insight. Why is that? Because they are not given the challenge, because the production is such that there is no scope for any challenge, which is actually their due. They should be given the chance to critically think, but they do not get that. So why? What do we see from that? That there is a distinction between this high and the low thing. And it is imperative of the commodity culture which we were speaking of. So that is the elitist thing which Steinert finds in Adorno and Horkheimer's work. Second is regarding the cult of novelty and newness. So their analysis, Horkheimer's and Adorno's analysis, that is obviously, we know, historically informed. And basic mechanism of commodification, it has nevertheless been vindicated by what? By industrial mode of cultural production, which has ultimately been taken for granted by us. We take it for granted that this commodification happens. And so artists, that is those who are the creators as well as theorists, what do they attempt? They try to make their reputation through this apparent originality of their insights, which ultimately, as we say, maybe is not there. So this newness of the cultural industry, which is different from the mass culture which was there previously, what does it give? It gives an emphasis on novelty, on newness of cultural products. And what they suggest, according to Steinert, is that it is just the cultural industry's fashion mechanism, nothing else. Okay, that is what they do. Third point, the rejection of cultural relativism. See, Adorno and Horkheimer, they accept social and cultural criticism. Okay. Only if that is reflexive. So, unlike postmodernism, so they do not accept that all positions, all thoughts, all viewpoints are totally valid. This obviously there is a resistance to look at the diversity. So what do they look at? The appeal of extreme relativism. Okay, and that is because of the specific formation of commodities and everything else in academic and even in intellectual marketplaces. So that is what Steinert speaks about, and which is in a way very idea dense, if you may say. I once again have a very big quotation, and I think what we were speaking about will be, we can clarify it here. This is by David Hesmontlal. The book was published in 2013, Cultural Industries, The Cultural Industries. So the quotation continues, saw the cultural industries, in other words, as contested. So first thing is, there is a contestation, a zone of continuing struggle. Okay, the fight is going on, whereas there is a constant sense in Adorno and Horkheimer that the battle is already lost. So for Adorno and Horkheimer and what we looked at previously, there was maybe a sense of despair. They believed as if it was over, the battle was lost. That culture had, I'm reading from the quotation, third line, that culture has already been subsumed both by capital and by an abstract system of instrumental reason. So remember what they said, that capitalism was doing everything, capital manufacturing means it was in the hands of the capitalists. So there is a suggestion maybe in Adorno, and there's a sense maybe in Adorno and Horkheimer that it is over. Continuing the quotation, Adorno and Horkheimer provide the fullest and most intelligent version of the extreme. That is the last point. Pessimistic view of the industrialization of culture. So in that time, long time back, this was pessimism at its height, totally. For other critics, for example, Miersch is referred here and others, even this intelligent version of cultural pessimism is lacking. So that was what they thought. As we moved forward, that pessimism was not there maybe. In fact, I read on, abandoning extreme pessimism is not the same as complacently celebrating the cultural industries as they are. The key words to repeat are, please note, complex, ambivalent, and contested. So it is not about pessimism. It is not that everything is lost. The new thing is, what we have to understand is, first of all, there are a complexity of issues. It's a very complex area. There is a lot of ambivalence. There is a lot of dichotomy. It is ambivalent. And then third, as we said in the very beginning, there are lots of contestations, a lot of contests. There is things going on in different ways, from different points of view. A lot of things are happening. So, using the term, I am continuing reading. Using the term cultural industry signals not only an awareness of the problems of industrialization of culture. So they looked at, Adorno and Horkheimer, at the industrialization of culture, so to say. So cultural industries, when we look at it, we see number one, the problems of industrialization of culture, and also refusal to simplify assessment and explanation. That is, it can be easily said and done, but maybe that is not done. So once again, these are sites of what? Complexity, ambivalence, and contestation. I just go back to 1984. Pierre Bourdieu, he was French, went to live in Algeria for some time, had a lot of Algerian friends, an anthropologist also. He lived in Algeria, I think, for some couple of years, if not more. Came back, had this work, which created a lot of interest. They called him post-colonial. Some do not agree. But just because we are speaking about the culture industry, which is a huge, long line of writing, which has so many thoughts and ideas, I thought that we should also look at what Bourdieu says. He, on the other hand, he moves on, or he's totally asks for revision. He says that it should be a revisionist movement now, and we should believe that culture is an autonomous thing. It is an autonomous field. He totally rejects the capitalist structures which were proposed by Adorno. He does not believe in the commodification which Adorno speak about. And he does not believe that through this commodification, ideological manipulation was done. Okay, remember we spoke about how the consumers were force-fed these things, and because of that, sort of hierarchies were created, class structures were created. Pierre Bourdieu, he sort of doesn't agree to that. What does he say? He, in fact, actually is looking at how institutions move and how institutions affect and are responsible in generating cultural patterns, in social patterns, and a lot of other things. So he says, social structures are very important. And we know museums. We know we work in educational institutions. So what do? They sort of consecrate and preserve goods. They also create people who create such goods or who reproduce such goods. And so museums, they preserve, they determine, consecrate great art. Educational institutions like the ones we work in, maybe like universities, teach the qualities of great art, that is appreciation. So when that is done, when such great art and its qualities and its features are taught, what happens? It is preserved. It is preserved, consecrated in. So in the teaching, obviously, it is preserved in the minds of the students, the people who are reading that, and also separate work is done in libraries, foundations, and also literary award system, which we spoke about at the very beginning. The role of the literary award system, the exotic thing. So great art moved that way. And when this is done, they sort of move away to neighboring fields also, because we started actually initially with media studies, with media, and moving on to literary criticism, and moving on to a literary canon. There is an identification of a literary canon, and maybe there is a movement away from a Marxist perspective. Somebody wants to be edited. There is a moving on from sort of Marxist perspective, and there is the growth of transnational, multinational, transnational corporations who sort of give birth to capital, who give birth to commodities from human cultures. Okay, so that is the idea. Nirmal Puva has this book, Post-Colonial Bourdieu, though in the title it is hyphenated, post-colonial. And as I said, there is this discussion about whether Bourdieu is post-colonial or not. Nirmal Puva says that post-colonial Bourdieu is an oxymoron. And class theorists, people who deal with classes, structures of classes, they sort of move away from Bourdieu, and they distance him from the post-colonial area, post-colonial field. Because we know that post-colonialism has also been uninterested in the issues of class. They are more interested in race and ethnicity. So Bourdieu, with its intricate and unacknowledged post-colonial sensibility, it maybe one can understand from the notion of post-colonial cultural industry. And so we are able to understand why goods, styles, thoughts, processes, ideas, why these things which come from the post-colonial world, ultimately why they are commodified. And from that, there is a sort of cosmopolitan distinction. And there is the formation of a new Orientalism. Originally, Orientalism was there, but then through this cultural thing, a sort of new Orientalism comes. When we are speaking about culture and culture industry, I think there has to be reference to Stuart Hall. I've been referring to a lot of others, a lot of other theorists, as even though it is not possible, I think you can understand in 1.5 hours to speak about everybody and what everybody has said. I have been very selective, and maybe I would be missing someone here or there. But then we would have to obviously refer to Stuart Hall, who believed that cultural studies, it's a response to the changes which are there in all around us, in public spheres, whatever is happening around us. And we have to understand, Stuart Hall reminds us that what is the role of media? The media is also colonizer. It has colonized our cultural and ideological spaces or spheres, most probably. What does the media do, according to Stuart Hall? It produces some sort of images, the representations, ideas around which social totality, composed of all separate and fragmented pieces, I'll just ask you, I believe I'm still audible and visible.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes.
sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, yeah, I'm sorry, because I believe there has been a power cut or something here. I'm sorry. Yes, so he speaks about how media sort of looks at everything and sort of creates everything. And if I may read from the quotation, that a message must be perceived as meaningful discourse and be meaningfully decoded before it has, please note, an effect, a use, or satisfies a need. So, what does Hall say? Hall's suggestion is, meaning is not something which is fixed or determined by the sender. Please note, sender means the creator, the manufacturer maybe. Also, the message is never transparent. And if you remember what Adorno had said, the audience was inert and everything. Here he says it's not passive recipient of meaning. Means previously we spoke about the fact that they had no scope, they had no critical insight, nothing. But Stuart Hall says something else. So if I may continue on that vein, and we have spoken about, we have quoted from David Espontagle before. Culture no longer works. He's writing this in 2030. Culture no longer works in regard to resistance or domination, primarily as a superstructure, base and superstructure. It no longer works primarily as a hegemonic ideology. No hegemonic formation, no ideological imposition. As symbols, as representations. So in classical cultural industry, both in terms of domination and resistance, contestations, mediation was primarily by means of the representation, how representation is done, and that is the site of contestation. So in global cultural industry, instead is the mediation of things. So that is his conclusion, that there is a sort of mediation, that is through representation, the global cultural industry is working today. And this is something which was said some 10 years back. When we speak about all this, if we just look at certain things which happened, so that was a lot of theoretical thing. When Adorno and Horkheimer, they were writing, they spoke about the Black cultural industry. They spoke about Black music. And we know that, we know about the role of the slave trade and how jazz music was created. We know about the blues. We know about the Black writers, the Black poets of that time, the Harlem Renaissance, and how in that part of that neighborhood of New York, a lot of things happened. There was a Renaissance. It moved on. So we know that music, the jazz music, it was actually created by slaves. It was and tap dance. It was done in the slave ships. That is how it was created. We know all that. So Adorno and Horkheimer, they believed, or they theorized that yes, there is a big relationship, or the most important relationship in the cultural industry is with music. That is the key feature. And when they speak about the role of music in the culture industry or the cultural industry, the relationship with ethnicity, it comes out. Because music per se is not a ethnicity. It is not without ethnicity. And they claim, I don't know, claims that just because jazz was actually a music of slaves. It was sung by peasant servant girls. It was by servant girls or slave girls. Then that is why it became a symbol of the domesticated people. It became a symbol of the music of slaves. So it was the symbol or the stamp was put on there. I quote, "Whatever was wild, untrammeled, original, or even African in this music had been destroyed by the cultural industry." So the cultural industry destroyed all these things when the music had been appropriated on the basis of a mass culture. So when it moved on to becoming mass culture, when the cultural industry appropriated it, all the original things, all the wildness was gone. That was the suggestion. That is what they meant. And when they were saying that, I think they were also referring to the Harlem Renaissance, though the Harlem Renaissance is a different context, and it means it was their sort of moving away from what they were and finding a new identity in America, and a lot of other things. It was through art, it was through literature, it was through the music clubs, the casinos, the music clubs, and the blues singers which they had, who became very, very famous. And that was a trope for a long, long time. If you remember Casablanca, what will you find? The singer is a black man in a piano. Okay, the blues singer. So that thing was there, but the suggestion is that yes, they were there, but they had been appropriated. The moment they came into the cultural industry, they had been appropriated. And with a reference to Ellis Cashmore, who writes in the 1997 work, The Black Cultural Industry, the belief is that cultural industry appropriated black music. It deflated the racial and ethnic roots, and it moved towards ethnicization. Totally ethnic values were important. Everything else was rejected. If I may quote from Cashmore, aspects of the Black experience can be integrated into the mainstream. Black experience means obviously the slaves, their experiences and everything. If you read American history, I think you will be aware of that. Can be integrated into the mainstream, and with the advent of mass media, consumed without even going near black people. Yes, so even though Harlem Renaissance actually does not say that, Harlem Renaissance, you go to the club, nightclub, you go to that bar club, you can hear the singers singing, you sit there. You are in close proximity of the singers, the blues singers. But one can consume this through mass media, even by not going there, because during Harlem Renaissance, another important thing was the black radio, which broadcast music, and the slaves all over the country, all over United States, they would be waiting to listen to the music, the blues music, to the music which was popular at that time. So you could consume that without even going near the black people. What happened? The next slide. Hit a remote button, control button, and summon the sounds and images of the ghetto. Ghettoization, Harlem Renaissance. Harlem is a ghetto, and there are lots of stories associated with Harlem. In fact, I also have a lot of stories where the police do not tell you not to go there or be careful. So that ghettoization was not there, was always there. So you like that sound from the ghetto, But then you sit at your home, remote control, you switch on the button, you can summon the sounds. This, I am continuing the quotation, reading from the quotation. This is culture as the antidote to racism, a way of removing the complexities of history and society from the mind by introducing a painless cure. What is the cure? Please note, legitimizing Black culture, its literature, its religion, its athleticism, and perhaps above all, its music. So what did the white society do? It legitimized everything. It appreciated Black culture, its literature. We have a lot of writers, religion, the athletics, because if you look at sports, for example, the most famous player from that time was the baseball player, Baby Ruth, R-U-T-H. Athleticism, in athletics, you find a lot of people from the Black culture, and also the music, the blues music. If this is so, it is time for Black culture to be examined with the same kind of cynicism that Theodore Adorno brought to American culture in general. Adorno's most potent argument was that the culture ushered in during modernity was and is manufactured by elites to serve their own interests. Please note, elites serving their own interests, often commercially as well as politically motivated ones. And that is why maybe politically motivated it was, because even after the Harlem Renaissance, long time later, Martin Luther King had to go to Washington almost 25 years later and say, I have a dream. Why? Because there was the Harlem Renaissance, there was everything, but then there was nothing actually, because maybe it was commercial exploitation. Coming back, Paul Gilroy, he has this chapter titled Jewels Brought from Bondage, Black Music and the Politics of Authenticity. He speaks about how Black culture has a sort of dislocation, it has been removed. And he also speaks about how much it is relevant in the history of Black music, because the history of Black music, how it is relevant, because it was actually born out of what? It was actually born out of racial slavery. But now it's a very important aspect of popular culture. And please note, even though Black people have got the chance to be part in the music industry, in the music field, I spoke about blues and blues singers, they were superstars in their own rights. What was not given? Other cultural forms access was not given, such as literacy. That was not given to these people. I quote from Kashmir. The forms to which Blacks had been granted access, like sport and music, have performed compensatory functions. So they were given chance in sports, in music. That was compensation, because actually in other areas, nothing was given to them. And this is, I think, contested. You may agree with me, not with me, with Paul Gilroy. The notion of hybridity goes both ways. That even the brutality of European cultures towards other cultures does not prevent them from also being influenced by their subordinates. I think they were, thereby undermining the nation as an ethnically homogeneous project. The concept of nation is a huge thing once again. Very briefly, I'm referring to it. Challenging and reforming European identity. So suggesting that while the brutality of European culture has been evident, we cannot also ignore the fact that, keeping in mind the notion of hybridity, that maybe to an extent they were also influenced and their European identity was also reformed or challenged, at least by their subordinates, by whoever they were culturally associated with. And from that, so that was the Black culture industry. And if we come to the brown culture industry, John Hutnick speaks about the analogous brown culture industry. For example, I'm quoting, there is the visibility and audibility of South Asian stars. Jackie Chan is a very, very famous example in the culture industry in itself. That is very useful, potentially useful, but not guaranteed progressive. A favorite trick co-opts a few high-profile names to foster the illusion that everything else is okay. So the main thing about this industry is that everything is fine, and they prop up a few. As I told you, for example, Jackie Chan. Nowadays there are these K-pop bands in Korea. Okay, they are means very famous, a lot of followers and everything. So what is the trick? The trick is there are some high-profile names. You prop them up, and the illusion, what is the optics which is generated? Everything is fine. But as Putnik writes, so on one side, there is this popularization of these Asian cool people. Cool means happening. But it does not simultaneously correspond to what? Any diminishing in racial attacks on Asians. I think a lot of you must have had the experience of being heckled in foreign airports. I have been. Whenever I go to white countries, there is always a separate checking for me. You speak about Australia, you speak about the UK, you speak of other countries. Yes, everywhere there is racial profiling, and they check our luggage, check us once more. X-ray scanner, you have to stand like that. Okay, they do that. So even though there is a suggestion that everything is good, but is it reflected in their actions? No. Do racial attacks? I think all of you read very recently. There were these Indian women in the US. They were racially abused by this Mexican woman. Okay. Has it stopped? No. Has racism, racial hatred stopped? No. I personally believe every time I go to an American or a European or not European, I would say, to an American, to a British, to an Australian airport, I am racially abused when I am asked to show my luggage once again. When white people walk free and I'm told to go to that gate so that there is separate checking for me. So this is the brown culture industry. They show that everything is good, but it is not so. So I'm reading from the quotation once again. So despite the effervescent cultural industries, the hybrid visibility of Asian cultural forms has not yet translated into significant socio-economic redress of multiracial exclusions within Fortress Europe. Yes, Fortress Europe. That is why I did not refer to Europe. They have this Schengen visa. They have these open borders. But some countries are very good. For example, Spain, they are very good. But then there is Italy, there is Poland. Okay, so it's a fortress. So apparently everything is good. Hybridity is there. Asian cultural forms are visible. Poland has a history of what Hitler did to them. But still, that thing has remained. Okay, so there is no movement, so to say. I'll now refer to Disorienting Rhythms, a book by Sanjay Sharma, John Hitnick, and Ashwini Sharma. And I'm quoting from them. So they say, saris, we know saris, Vindaloo, and Ravi Shankar, the musician, are perhaps some of the less offensive ethnically marked objects that define a South Asian cultural presence in multi-racist Britain. Their work is related to Britain. So why should we complain? Ethnicity is in, that is accepted. Cultural difference is in. Marginality is in. Consumption of the other is all the rage for late capitalism. That is, other means consumption of things of the other. Okay. Finally, it appears that the coolie has become cool. Yet in congruence, racial violence continues to soar as Fortress Europe further secures its borders. So on one side, as we are aware, refugees, they want to go into Europe. They are caught into Europe, into US. We know of the Gujarati family who froze to death in the Mexican border. We every day read about Algerians and people from Africa coming in boats, trying to cross into Italy and other places. The fortress remains. These things are coming in. It seems everything is cool, but is it? A very recent thing which happened, I think yesterday or day before yesterday, you may have your opinions about that. We means the selection of the British Prime Minister. Okay. So, did the brown man succeed? He did not. So, one can say that why should we complain? Ethnicity is in, cultural differences in, marginality is in, but then the other is different. Okay, so I'll just quote again. So I think I don't have time. I'll just move on. And move on to what Lisa Lau and Anna Mendes terms as re-Orientalism. What are we doing? This is a new method of consumption, we consumers, where Orientals, means us maybe, reappropriate their own constructed otherness and alterity by the consumption of ethnic items. So we look at ethnic items, we are the consumer. So I quote, "It is no longer about an Orientalism propagated by the Occidentals, but ironically enough by Orientals, albeit by diasporic Orientals maybe. This process, which is here termed as re-Orientalism by Lisa Lau and Anna Mendes, dominates and to a significant extent distorts the representation of the Orient. What does it do? It seizing voice and platform, and once again consigning the Oriental within the Orient to a position of the other. So that is re-Orientalism. So Oriental is there. Once again, it has a new place. It is inside itself, it is another other. Okay, that is what they refer to. Very briefly, because this has a lot of examples. How do we understand this with respect to post-colonialism and culture industry? For example, Sadia Toor speaks about Indo-Chic. That is the name of the book. So India was initially an exporter of Oriental styles and goods. But there is a sort of neo-Orientalism. And because of that, what happened? India is now its own internal market. Means India is now not only an exporter, but also a consumer of its own things. So it was previously producer exporter, but it is now a consumer. And so the products which are consumed, the exotic products which are manufactured, it is not only for the Western capitalist elites, for the hippies, but there is also a new generation of young, urban, cosmopolitan, hip Indian crowd who also consume these products. And this is also related, as Sadia Toor writes, related to India being aspiring, India being aspirational, India aspiring to be a part of the global economy. We recently saw that India is now the 5th largest. It overtook its colonial master, Great Britain. Now it is the 5th largest economy in the world. So that thing is there. And that is ultimately proved, or that is sort of there in Indian culture consuming its own country. That is, we are also interested in what we have, the exotic things which we have. And that exoticization happens for our products which are generated in our country also, and we are the consumers. Because advertising is very good, maybe. Because the global cultural industry is focusing on what is Indo-Chic. Chic means happening, which is one of the latest trends. And it as I said, it combines together with the fact that India is an emerging market with a lot of people having disposable income, and so Indo-Chic is happening. It works. And so Tour writes, if Orientalism, and I quote, was manifestation of the Occident's will to power over the Orient. So this new Orientalism, it rehearses the same relationship, but with a crucial difference. Today, the production, circulation, consumption, in the case of these cultural commodities, please note, as we discussed previously, originates and culminates in India. But very importantly, unfortunately, there is, however, a crucial period of mediation by the West. So India originates it, India creates it, it culminates in India, that is, we are the consumers. But in the middle of everything, there is this West. It plays a crucial, there is a crucial period of mediation by the West. Why? Where the commodities are circulated and then sanctioned by cultural critics as authentically Indo-Chic. I hope you understood what it says. So we are manufacturing something which is called Indo-Chic. We are consuming something which is called Indo-Chic. But who is giving the guarantee? Who is certifying it? The certification is coming from the West. They are sanctioning these cultural, the West, the cultural critics from the West, they are sanctioning that this is authentic Indo-Chic, and then we are buying it. And two goes on to, and I don't think I have time, I'll just wrap up, goes on to speak about a lot of things. And this sort of self-exoticism which is there. There is cosmopolitanism today, and we have this sort of self-exoticism, which is very, very much happening in the urban elite, and to an extent now it is going to semi-urban places also today. And that is what is exploited by the West, because we are consuming everything. And we think that we are countering Western hegemony. But are we? For example, she speaks about these films actually came out long time back. Mirana's Mississippi Masala. There was neo-exoticism. Deepa Mehta's Earth. Arundhati Roy's God of Small Things. There is a cultivated rebelliousness against Western hegemony. Salman Rushdie, in a way, in his writing, he sort of works, or he works as an expert. He sort of validates whatever is exported out of India. He's sort of a validator, according to Tur. I'll just sum up with a couple of things. You can look at this T-shirt. This was actually maybe a sort of naive blind spot racism. This was done in 2006 by some young Asian activists. They wanted to create an alternative sort of narrative and campaign. So they launched this T-shirt. The name of the company was Desi Threads. And they parodied the company UPS, its slogan. Also, if you look at the color, if it is visible to you, the color of the T-shirt is chocolate brown. It is not black. Okay, chocolate brown. And so UPS, their slogan was, how can we help you, sort of. But what do they write? United Desi Service. What can brown do for you? Brown means the color of the T-shirt is brown, obviously, chocolate brown. That is reference to UPS's signature chocolate brown dress for its employees. but this sort of resistance maybe is there. And they were trying to, in a way, they were trying to use clothing to sort of, as we say, write back, or if we may say, dress back, okay, and sort of fight against the racism that is evident. So this is something which happened in 2006. What can Brown do for you? When we speak about strategic neo-Orientalism, this is a picture from the Golden Globe Awards. I think this is 2001 or 2002. Shah Rukh Khan, I think we can identify him. He was introduced to the American audience as the king of Bollywood. I think we know that is a term which is used for him. So the American audience, for the first time, they were introduced to Shah Rukh Khan as king of Bollywood, and this was happening in the Golden Globe Awards. As you can see, there are two competing visions of this Asian. So Shah Rukh Khan is actually an Asian other for the Western viewers. And don't you think there are two competing visions here? First of all, he is the king. King means exotic spectacle. King of what? Bollywood. What is the name Bollywood? The Bollywood is a spin. The name Bollywood, the word B is used from Bombay. Bollywood is what? Spin-off of Hollywood. So instead of H, B is used. King, exoticization of the Asian other. So when we look at this picture, what do we see? There is the Hollywood royalty, if you may use the word. And in that Hollywood royalty are these exotic people, these exotic Indian or Asian people, the Asian other, who are spectacular because he is king of Bollywood. But do you remember, there was also this case that this same king of Bollywood, he was stopped at a US airport. That is the ugly face of reorientalism, if you remember. He was stopped at New York airport. Newark Liberty International Airport is the Newark airport in New York. One of the airports, sorry. And he was there to celebrate India's Independence Day. He was there to promote this film, My Name is Khan. Maybe you have seen it. It's a very ironic film. It is about a Muslim American who has Asperger's syndrome, who is racially profiled as being a terrorist. And then what happens in real life? This man, as we saw in the previous picture, who is supposed to be the king of Bollywood, who is the Asian other, who is an exotic spectacle, is also what? He is mistaken for a terrorist. So once again, that is another face of neo-colonialism. And if you look at these pictures, what is this? A sort of, as Appadurai has referred previously, nostalgia without memory. So India-inspired fashion. What does it inspire? It inspires a sense of nostalgia. Mystic India, the great Indian rope trick, the sadhu sitting on the rope, the great Indian rope trick, and so many others. So this nostalgia, how is it produced? How does it happen? Obviously through consumption. So these are means maybe dresses which evoke India. Okay, these are obviously representational dresses which I took off the internet. But there is a consumption market, there is a consumer. It happens here. And so there is a sense of nostalgia, which uses what? Merchandise as a marketing strategy that tricks consumers into missing what they haven't lost. So nostalgia without memory. So it's trickery. The consumers are tricked into buying this. And ultimately, it leads to what? A sort of popularization of so-called post-colonial objects, which is there in fashion, in music, in books, in cinema, and lots of other places. So if we look at I think I'll just, because we don't have time, I think I just move on. Actually, this is reference to post-colonial text and how we should read. And means I'll just jump to probably the most important thing here, Sandra Ponzanesi, 2014 work, which was very, very important. The post-colonial cultural industry, icons, markets, methodologies, and Sandra has a lot of work on this. And if you read this book, it is available with me. If you want, I can give you a copy, or you can purchase it. What does she suggest? These 3 points, I'll read very fast if I can. Number one, identify the trajectory of post-colonial artifacts and their meaning making. Okay. And so through that, you identify its post-colonial value. And then move on to distribution, reception, evaluation, and the stuff. Number two, take into account the medium specificity of post-colonial artifacts. In the translation, transposition, convergence, from moving from one medium to another, that is maybe from a novel to a cinema, to a film, there are different apparatuses of cultural industry which become involved. And what they do? So when a novel moves on to becoming a film, when there is a change of medium, there is inevitably some transforming of content, context, which is reworked for, as she suggests, post-colonial distribution. Third, audiences, because Adorno said that they had no role at all. Audiences are not only critical, but also multiple and differentiated. That is, each and every one has a different thought process. So what kind of readers, viewers, consumers do we have in mind when we engage with the post-colonial cultural industry? That is a question which needs a lot of things to say. It means you can have a lot of things to say and a lot of ways in which you can answer that. And so that is the question. Do we assume a cosmopolitan critical participant who does not succumb to entertainment and the suspension of critical awareness? Just as Coleridge spoke about suspension of belief when he speaks about his romanticism, suspension of disbelief, sorry. Here also, maybe, is there a scope for suspension of critical awareness? Or do we engage with a multi-sited reading, which varies not only across space and time, but according to post-colonial literacies? Please note the word post-colonial literacies, very important, because in that we also refer to Hall or we refer to Spivak. I'm not going into that because that is a different area altogether. So how do we engage with post-colonial objects, and how do we take it forward? How does or would the post-colonial cultural industry continue to work? That is a question which Sandra Ponzanesi raises. She has a lot of articles. She continues writing all this. And so if we follow what she's suggesting or what she's looking at or what she's telling us to, you may not accept, because why would someone from the West tell us how we look at it? But it will, according to her, help in understanding this industry from a new critical framework, new optic of analysis. And there is a requirement of sort of these colonial or post-colonial artifacts being identified, accounted for, elaborated, consumed, and a lot of stuff. there would be reference to the cultural industries, publishing, film, museums, games, architecture, music, designing. A lot of things are there. And there should be no co-opting of things or cannibalizing of things for just post-colonial purposes. For commercial purposes. But there should be interest in promotion of new aesthetics, so that there are new modes of appreciation and evaluation. And that is how you can open up new avenues which will help in emancipating this post-colonial from this niche market. Because the moment it stays in the niche market, it is lost. And only then, I think, would be able to really understand post-colonial works. We would be able to understand the local and the global dynamics. We would be able to understand what post-colonial works actually are, and ultimately move away from the post-colonial frame and maybe look at what these mean actually. Thank you so much. I'm sorry I took so much time, and I skipped certain things. As you would understand, 1.5 hours speaking about the culture industry is not a lot of time, because there are so many things, and I briefly tried to look into that. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your patience.
Questions? There was one hand raised, suppose.
Yeah, I think that was raised at the very beginning. I saw, yeah.
Okay.
Doc-
You might have satisfied him or her. I don't know who that was.
I think Dr. Manoj S. Madhavi.
Okay, Manoj Madavi.
Madhavi, yeah.
Yeah.
And I
Manoj.
think that was raised in the very beginning.
Okay. So, sir started with the popular novels, popular among us, that is Midnight's Children, God of Small Things, Slumdog Millionaire, and how they are part of culture industry, and how they were promoted, how they were propagated for success, and how media have worked for these different books. And nowadays, it is no more a spontaneous process, but a planned one. But because of bankruptcy of culture, he said, and the consumer has become a mere commodity, and how the term the cultural industry changed from changed into cultural industries from singular to plural. After that, he mentioned many books on which books on the relevant subject, and brought out the substance of the matter in them. He introduced us to the black cultural industry and the brown cultural industry. So on behalf of the university and the participants of this refresher course, I thank sir for being a part of this course and through his presentation this morning, and hope to have same kind of cooperation for him in the future as well. So thanks a lot. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Sir. Namaste. Yeah.
Namaste,
Sir, just one thing, if I may add.
Yes,
if you need, if our fellow colleagues who are here with us today, because these books are very interesting reading. So if if anybody asks you for books or these articles, I know though they are available online. And it is not right to distribute PDF copies of this. I understand that very well. But if there is any requirement, do tell me. I'll send it over, because these are I have PDF works, and they make very interesting reading, I believe.
Okay. So the participants, did you get what sir is saying? In case of your requirement for any of the books that he has mentioned.
Yes, sir. That will be a great help, sir. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So thanks a lot, sir. And I announce that the session is over, and we'll be meeting in the next session with Dr. Prantik Banerjee.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.